I just think that these questions are radioactive. They're too dangerous to talk about. I want to make this very clear. We've lost control of our journalists, and we've lost control of our major news media. The Democratic Party is driving away men in droves.
You're clearly and rightly upset, and
No. That's to psychologize this. The Democratic Party has seemingly lost its mind. And I don't know how to say this because it's my party.
What does the future look like for that party?
Both of these parties are functioning in separate universes. These are two different planets. We have a very brittle system, and we cannot afford for populists, scientists, journalists to go poking around and asking questions.
You sound like a populist intellectual.
I'm an intellectual.
And you're a populist. This is by definition populist. You have a problem with elite failure across the board.
Do me a favor, Winston. Think about it. You should be able to know that something is wrong by how little we're discussing AI in this election cycle. AI is a tsunami that is about to crash over our world.
Before you hear from Dr. Weinstein, I ask if you want to support the show, all you have to do is press subscribe. If you press subscribe, I can have more phenomenal guests like Eric exploring the issues that you want to hear about and the mainstream media won't cover. But without further ado, here he is, Eric Weinstein. So, Eric, thank you, of course, for sitting with me to talk on the show.
Thanks for coming to LA.
It's great to be here. I know how precious your time is, so it means a lot to me that you would take the time to speak with me. I want to ask, I'm going to try and find a question, because you said before we started rolling, you get asked all the same questions and you don't want to be asked all the same questions. I hope that you haven't been asked this question before. What I wanted to discuss with you first is cuck culture. And I'm going to try and make the case why I think it's important. I don't know if you saw Trump's speech at the Al Smith dinner. He made a joke. Have you seen the White Guys for Harris movement?
Sure.
I'm not worried about them because their wives and their wives' lovers are all voting for me. But not only that, we have Elon Musk regularly on Twitter making fun of the cuck chair in hotel rooms. At the same time, the Democrat Party, the whole campaign seems to be littered with anti-testosterone, anti-male sentiment. Dana Bash at the DNC was saying, we've got to appeal to lower T men. Doug Emhoff and Tim Walz appear to me to be men who are, I would say, beta male. And the failure, and we see this in the voting, is that they're struggling to get the male vote. And at the same time, the Republican Party are more masculine and perhaps not doing so well with white women, or women and white women specifically. I wanted to know what you think, if this represents anything in America. Why is cuck culture suddenly come out of nowhere to be something that your former president is literally joking about at dinner parties?
It's a perfectly unique, wonderful, awful, terrible question to begin with, so thank you for
that.
Where to even begin? First of all, the issue, I think, of co-constructed masculinity and femininity is very much on the table. And trying to define the masculine in the absence of the feminine doesn't work. And in general, nobody wants these things clearly defined. So were we to say what is masculine and what is feminine, no doubt the comment section of your video would be littered with people taking shots at both of us. How dare they think this? They fancy themselves that. So it's an area that's too hot to touch. And in a certain sense, what this gets at is two different co-constructions of male and masculine and feminine. In one case, I would say based around the Republican Party, you have an idea of a traditional division of labor where men and women accentuate their differences, and the idea of almost the family as pin factory, the male as protector, breadwinner, the woman as nurturer. They can both be quite tough. You know, anybody who's spent time on a farm knows that the women on a farm can handle a shotgun quite well and know how to do things that no man in a city would find easy. So if you have the idea that if there's an intruder in the house, the man goes towards the danger with his gun and the woman goes towards the nursery with hers, and everybody's spending time protecting the castle.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's not a question of weak women and strong men. It's a question of strong men, strong women, but clearly delineated roles that are sort of inherited from our biology and from antiquity. And I think that the Democratic Party is much more about the idea that there was an intrinsic unfairness built in to the world. And to quote the great James Brown, it's a man's world. So this has to do with the fact that women's work in the home was traditionally denigrated. Men who wished to work at home, raising the family, if the woman in the relationship was a more successful breadwinner, let's say, that was seen as a terrible state of affairs and embarrassing to the Republican side of the world, but this was seen as progressive and, in fact, an advanced idea that men and women are free to redefine their roles at will. And then we have the question about redefining gender and sex itself. So where does this all lead? It really leads to two different concepts of how we should balance things. And if you think about your country as driving on one side of the road and my country is driving on the other side, you could attempt potentially to base a society around either one of these two models, but it's very difficult to combine the two. And so what you see is that the conservatives are basically saying to the Democratic men, you're weak. And the reason that you've accepted this bargain is that you're not strong enough and you're not male enough to negotiate a better one for you. And it's ugly, for sure. But on the other hand, it rings true when you see, for example, Tim Walz not being able to find his way easily around a shotgun or a rifle. And it's one thing to say, I don't hunt. It's another thing to claim to hunt and to claim to own firearms and then not really be able to load them, clean them, behave safely with them. That just looks ridiculous. And so in a certain sense, it's like making your bid in bridge. If you're going to claim that you're just as masculine as the other party and then you fail your own test, that's really a terrible turn of events. And
Did you see the video? There's been two ads, one I think by the Lincoln Center and one by, I believe it was actually the Democrats, but the motto, it's you have a series of men saying, I'm not scared of women, which to me screams that they're scared of women. It's totally bizarre appeal to masculinity, like the Democrat conception of what masculinity is, if they think it's appropriate. Did you see those ads?
So I believe it was not an official ad of the campaign, but it was a sort of a writer for one of the late night talk shows, perhaps, showing men, sitting on the back of a pickup truck, or I don't know, baling hay or doing supposedly masculine things, saying, I'm so masculine, I don't need to worry about your pigeonholing me. And of course it backfired because it looked ridiculous. In fact, and I hesitate to enter this into the discussion, the concept of cucking comes from cuckold. And in fact, there's a more dangerous term that is not in broad usage from Older English, which is wittol. And a wittol is the willing cuckold who, in fact, has a fetish and gets off on the idea of the introduction of the lover.
Yeah, I actually think that's what people mean when they say cuck now.
I know.
They mean wittol.
They mean wittol. And, this is just terrible politics. This is really a dangerous moment because this just invites in all of the worst aspects of these two conceptualizations of where we should be going. In part, both men and women have been moving towards each other. A woman can now egg broadcast, where before men were the only ones who could sperm broadcast, right? So a woman who contributes eggs through egg donation could be the mother to many more children than any woman in history, right? Because if you have to go pregnancy by pregnancy, it certainly slows you down. Genghis Khan could not be matched by any woman. So in part, what you're seeing is you're seeing men and women moving towards each other in earning potential. They're moving towards each other in style of dress. In general, everyone wears pants. Very few people wear heels.
And some more men are wearing dresses.
That's still an oddity. I can go an entire week in Los Angeles and not see a man in a dress on the street. So we can talk about the fact that these things are claimed, but much more what's happening is that the genders are converging into an amorphous blob, and there's two sort of sets of feelings around it. There's the more conservative feeling, which is we need to accentuate that which is male and that which is female, versus the, hey, everybody do your own thing. It just doesn't matter. And the concern, of course, is that really all this is about children. It's about the ability to raise families, the ability to figure out how to get everyone into some sort of an arrangement. For example, if I encounter you on the road and you're driving English and I'm driving American, we have a really serious diversity problem because those things are incompatible. And I'll tell you what I find the most interesting thing in this discussion that you bring up is I don't think Democratic women understand the pressure that men are under when a man wants to pick up a check, a man wants to pull out a chair, a man wants to do all sorts of traditionally male things, and then only to find himself ridiculed as if he's a throwback to a previous era. The Democratic Party is driving away men in droves who do not relate to the Democratic Party's concept of male. It's tone deaf.
Well, I can give you statistics on it.
Sure.
This is from a Balaji article that he wrote. It's not just that men and women are being split.
Married and unmarried?
It's married and unmarried.
Sure.
And so unmarried women are the only demographic where more than 50% are voting Democrat.
But wildly, like 63%.
Yeah, 68%.
68.
And that's according to he cites the Washington Examiner on that. There's a recent article I'd love to read if you don't mind,
sure,
from Unheard, which is, well, there's two actually, but the first one's a little provocative. The point I want to make, though, is that what you've already described is that they're playing politics and they're using the male-female languages against each other, like I've cited Trump already has done so. But there is at the base level a split, a divergence in politics between men and women. And we've seen this in my country with Farage's Reform UK appealing to younger men. The Alternative for Deutschland in Germany, they also have young men who are increasingly voting right-wing. Meanwhile, women and young women are increasingly progressive. So there is a split in the politics.
Which is a disaster.
A disaster. And one obvious way this is a disaster, and this is from a recent Unheard article, only 4% of marriages in America today are between Democrats and Republicans. With the increase in gender divide for the parties. In the 50s, 10% of Americans expressed a partisan preference for their daughter's spouse. That figure has since climbed to 60%. Parents need to not be concerned. Only 4% of marriages are now between Republican and Democrat. So if men and women are increasingly diverging on politics,
sure,
and only 4% are having bipartisan marriages, that means fewer and fewer marriages, which we know is also true. More provocative still is this Unheard piece.
By the way, I just want to make clear what you just said, because I think I want to make sure I understand, first of all. I think what you're saying is, let's take as a given that the parties are successfully figuring out how to divide men from women in the unmarried pool. Given that, and given the fact that marriage between these perspectives is seemingly not very attractive and not working, just at a statistical level, what we're doing is making sure that families will have a very difficult time forming by getting to these two groups early and making it difficult for them to harmonize with each other later in life.
So here's from a piece by David Samuels from August in Unheard again. Kamala Harris is a flesh and blood avatar of a much more numerous, powerful, and radically dissatisfied demographic, never married and childless American women between the ages of 20 and 45. Aside from mass immigration, the most striking demographic development of the past decade is the large cohort of American women who who have embraced the helping hand of the state in place of the increasingly suspect protection of fathers, brothers, boyfriends, and husbands. In so doing, they have become the Democrat Party's most enthusiastic and decisive constituency. According to a recent Pew survey, these quote-unquote brides of the state support Democrats over Republicans by a whopping 72 to 24%, providing the party with its entire advantage of both national and most state elections. So this is a really profound. It's not just happening on the
Yeah.
it seems like it bodes very badly for the future.
Well, but then again, does the future even matter? So, if there was a rallying cry to the women who will never have children, I would say it's no F's left to give. You hear this over and over again. I'm running out of F's to give. I'm all out of F's. And you think, well, what is that about? Everyone I know who has children has plenty of F's to give. We're never out of F's to give. Mm-hmm. I have 2 kids. I will never stop caring about the world. Mm-hmm. And this idea also begs the question, well, how do I even put this? What are your interests later in life as you come to see yourself as female, very often having maternal instincts, but nothing to alight upon? I think what happens is you start taking on causes. And I bring up this example of Mother Jones, where before there was a magazine, there was an actual labor leader named Mother Jones, who we seemingly have forgotten. And I believe her backstory was something like she lost her actual sons and basically adopted the coal miners and steel workers.
Oh. What period is this?
Oh, I don't know. Late 1800s, early 20th century, something like that.
Uh-huh.
We haven't, there is no knowledge of the coal wars and the fact that we had, essentially slavery in Appalachia into the 20th century with companies owning entire towns, having their own armies that they were called detective agencies, issuing their own money, which was called script. So we have a really violent history of labor. And it was led in part by a woman who, after losing her own children, adopted these extremely masculine workers. And, the Battle of Blair Mountain, I believe a million rounds were fired before the government stepped in. So, we have a history that is somehow not known. It's known to people like JD Vance, but it's not known more broadly. And oddly, JD Vance sort of has picked up the progressive streak of labor that was present in Appalachia as the Democratic Party abandoned coal miners. And started spitting on them as deplorables and Bible thumpers and backwards people. So this concept of what is it that has been discovered in this demographic? Elections tend to be won by demographers. That's why, if you recall in years past, we had the concept of the soccer mom. Soccer mom was the discovery of a demographic that had been neglected and had particular sets of interests. Mm-hmm. So if you can find in the data some group of people that is large, pivotal in terms of tipping an election, but has unmet needs and doesn't hear itself reflected, that's a way to win an election. So after the soccer mom, I think the exurbs was the next great demographic discovery, that there were urban people, there were suburban people, and there were rural people. But nobody knew that there was somehow a group of people who were more distant from cities than suburban, but not yet rural. And this was called the exurb. And so there was an attempt to say, okay, well, what does the exurb want? And how do we get there before the other party so that we can win an election? I believe, in part, the concept of women who will never bear their own children is the great demographic discovery of this cycle.
Yeah. Well, and that's what is termed in a derogatory sense as the crazy cat lady.
Interesting, because I believe that peak millennial births were in the early 1990s, and so that the really important cohort here may not be women who are in perimenopause or postmenopause, or they may be, in fact, women who are starting to realize that their marriage prospects in their mid-30s are dim and are just hearing terms like geriatric pregnancy, which kicks in around 35 for the first time, and this mania about freezing eggs and embryos, and the question of for this demographic, one of the biggest questions is, will I ever find a stable relationship and a family? Or will I be forever on my own with a series of partners, in which case it's important that the state recognizes my need to compete in the workforce, and I wish to neutralize male advantages like work-life balance can be seen through this lens, that if women find that men want to come in, live in their office and stay up through all hours and come in on weekends, they may view that as an unhealthy behavior because it results in an unfair advantage as perceived by those women at work. And so to a certain extent, there's this question about the life cycle. Am I going to have to fend for myself throughout my life? In which case the state might need to make sure that I'm protected. Or am I going to be able to drop into a situation in which there are two breadwinners and there's shared interest, and I can afford to change my politics? And so I just think that these questions are radioactive. They're too dangerous to talk about. Every time you attempt to talk about it, you just find that there's a group of people who's trying to make sure that it can't be discussed.
And you had such a scenario, I believe, with JD Vance. Am I right? I don't know this story. I'd love to know what happened, but it was a couple of months ago where they dug up some old conversation that you'd had with JD Vance about the grandmother hypothesis. Does this tie in with what's going on? Do you think this deliberate attack on you, straw manning, or rather, isn't the grandmother hypothesis about why menopausal women are unique to humans and a couple of other species? This is kind of common, and yet this has been brought into the political war, the campaign war. What do I need to understand about this? What do you think is the relevance of it?
Well, you're talking about the weaponization. So we have to talk about something which is very difficult to discuss, which is I've called journo painting, where you're campaigning. Painting. It's a portmanteau of journalism and campaigning, where you're actually functioning as a political operative under the guise of journalistic immunity. I'm merely reporting the news, but in fact what you're doing is you're advancing one side. Now, we know the situation in this case because all of these news organs have historically, once every several years, revisited something called the grandmother hypothesis. And the grandmother hypothesis has to do with a guy named George C. Williams, who is an eminent evolutionary theorist, puzzling over this question of why so few mammalian species have long life after reproductive viability for females. So I think it's orcas, humans, it may be like right whales. Some people have claimed chimpanzees, but it's very, very rare to have menopause in any species. And so that's been a big evolutionary puzzle. Now, in evolutionary theory, you take shorthand, shortcuts, if you will, in talking about this. And you say, what is the purpose of a post-evolutionary female? That's not human-specific. It says that basically, the theory of evolution is predicated on three separate issues: heritability, variation, and differential success. Now, it's very clear that when the Democratic Party says that it is the pro-science party, nothing like this is true. In fact, the Democratic Party will fight tooth and nail to unhook all our understanding of evolutionary theory. And why is this? Well, in part, if you think about it, heritability is privilege, variation is diversity, and differential success is inequality. Right? And so the three elements that are necessary for the theory of natural and sexual selection to be operative are tied in with the Democratic Party's understanding of the social context of the human species. Now, humans are extremely bizarre. There are about 5,000 mammalian species. I think we are the only ones with persistent mammary glands. In some sense, males and females are reversed. If you think about in nature, very often the brightly adorned, if you think about peacocks and peahens in avians, peacocks are male, peahens are bland and female. And yet, if you had to assign who is more brightly adorned between males and females, human females are much more eye-catching than human males. And why is this? Because we are a very unusual species. We're one of the only ones with concealed ovulation, where it's not clear when a female is ovulating. So with that as context, in the late 50s, George C. Williams came up with a discussion of what's called antagonistic pleiotropy, trying to figure out why we senesce, why we age. And this theory emerged, I think actually later called the grandmother hypothesis, out of the University of Utah perhaps, which said that kin work was actually the key to understanding the phenomena. So if you look at orcas, for example, which I tend to think of much more than humans because they're a cleaner example, old female orcas past their reproductive prime, if they have offspring, tend to get outcompeted by the offspring of their own daughters. And so at some point, it switches to being more advantageous for what is called K-selected species, where there's a tremendous amount of parental care and teaching, for the older females to stop producing offspring of their own and to contribute their wisdom, protection, and care to their own grandchildren. So I made a point like this in an interview with JD Vance when we were both celebrating the fact that we were married to Indian women, and that one of the unadvertised benefits that I was not aware of when I got married is that it is common for Indian women's mothers to drop whatever they're doing and spend half a year to a year caring for their daughter's children. Mm. And in JD's case, I believe that he's married to an Indian woman whose mother is a very well-known biologist, professor at one of the UC campuses, who dropped everything and culturally just started caring for their kid. And, you know, in my case, we got kicked out of our bed. We happily slept on the sofa couch for months. And we were taught how to care for a child by my mother-in-law, Esther Milani, as, you know, an expert thing. So we were both remarking on this. Now, what's fascinating is that all of these news outlets found this thing at once and said far right-wing host, which is me, who's never voted Republican, makes claim that the only purpose of, and I think I said postmenopausal females, where they said, why can't you say women? But I was not thinking about women. I was thinking about orcas, to be entirely honest, because that's what's normal in evolutionary theory. And I said, essentially the only function known is to take care of offspring, which might be called kin work or inclusive fitness or something like that. Mm. My God, all of these papers found this to be absolutely outrageous. But the funny thing is that they'd already published their own articles on the grandmother hypothesis, and their quotes were far more salacious than anything I said. Mm. So in other words, you have the same news organ taking as a privilege the ability to be provocative about what is the purpose of postmenopausal females. And then when it becomes politically advantageous, what they're really doing is they're doing campaigning under the guise of reporting on how outrageous JD Vance is and how extreme he is.
And this would be predominantly, if not all, progressive mainstream media outlets.
No, not even progressive.
Were conservative media outlets painting you the same way?
Well, the Washington Post, I wouldn't call it progressive. I would say that this is the absolute core. Can you find the Washington Post's, I don't know, it's 2016, 2017 article on the grandmother hypothesis?
How Human Society Was Built by Grandmas. This is September 10th, 2015. Grandmothers, they feed you, they spoil you, they constantly needle you about your relationship status. And according to anthropologist Kristen Hawkes, they might be the driving force behind the evolution of much of human society.
I wish I could find the actual quote, because it says, what is the purpose of postmenopausal females? Roughly speaking, and I want to make this very clear, we've lost control of our journalists and we've lost control of our major news media. This is absolutely abominable. You target me as a private American citizen running a podcast as if I'm a far-right extremist. I have a Harvard PhD in a STEM field. I'm exactly within the mainstream of evolutionary thought. Mm-hmm. You publish articles on the same thing. and you attempt to destroy me in order to get to JD Vance, and you claim to be the science party. No, you are the anti-science party, and I want to be very clear about this. You've crossed the line. You are anti-intellectual. You are anti-science. You have not read the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. You are in flagrant violation of everything that the field of journalism depends upon for its immunity to represent the public interest. You're supposed to be bending over backwards to get all points of view. You don't bother to contact me. You don't offer me a chance to point out your own hypocrisy within your own pages. And you have, 25 different outlets? I have a spreadsheet. It's very clearly coordinated. There used to be something called Journo List, which coordinated the political left-leaning journalists that I think Ezra Klein began. I have no idea who coordinated this. But my claim is that you cannot have the Democratic Party of the United States, which I am my party, targeting individuals for personal destruction just for the benefit of campaigning from behind the diplomatic immunity, if you will, granted to journalists in issues of adjudicating truth. These are bad and horrible people. They are anti-science. They're claiming to be pro-science. Their hypocrisy needs to be called out. There is no one to report on them because they are the reporters themselves. And what we're talking about is we are talking about a form of journalistic evil.
You're clearly and rightly upset. And
No. That's to psychologize this. I am clearly and rightly aggrieved because of a grave injustice visited upon me for the purpose of getting to JD Vance. And what's more, I will tell you this. JD Vance called me as the only Democrat to meet with him in secret in Ohio, where many of the most illustrious names in the conservative sphere met in quiet and in private to try to figure out how to help all of the people injured by NAFTA, by our various trade agreements negotiated with Democratic administrations. Effectively, JD was doing the work, and I hate to say this, of progressives who have traditionally trumpeted the interests of those without college education, with limited prospects, of lower middle class working families. And they did so without trying to seek any kind of financial advantage. They did not advertise this from the point of view of getting political advantage. The Democratic Party has seemingly lost its mind. And I don't know how to say this because it's my party. I've never voted Republican. Who do you think you are? From what planet did you descend? Have you no concept of what the Democratic Party was before its evil turn towards Dick Morris after the era of Mike Dukakis? Did you just wake up one day and decide that you were going to be nothing but complete evil to people who are good, hardworking Americans, even your own party members? You're just going to abandon all journalistic standards?
If I may,
Yeah.
You say you moved there to the Democrat Party. Are you encompassing?
I don't even call it Democrat Party because that's intended to get the word rat to sound at the end. Call it the Democratic Party. I'm a Democrat, okay?
Yeah.
I call it the Democratic Party.
But you're
It's my
including
party.
the journalists in that
Yeah.
as part of the same sort of blue machine.
I mean, it's the universities, it's the think tanks, it's the late night talk shows. It's this giant juggernaut that's wall to wall coordinated campaigning. And it's journo painting and it's comeda painting where, you just have Stephen Colbert making joke after joke, all the late night comedians, clearly this thing is basically, it used to be that a comedian in an election year would make jokes on both sides. They'd poke fun at the candidates. This isn't that. Some unholy thing has happened on one side of the aisle. Now, I have plenty of problems with the Republicans. I've said that Donald Trump is too old. I have real questions that I think what happened on January 6th was a disaster. I don't think it's a small thing. I'm not carrying water for the Republicans. I just keep looking at my own party and saying, how can we not recognize each other? Do you realize that you have left a sitting president in the Oval Office with apparently 6 or 7 minutes of a window to respond to a nuclear attack, who is clearly suffering various forms of dementia, has probably had Parkinson's for years? You can ask any geriatric neurologist, where is Joe Biden in his stage of degeneration? If he can't campaign, why is he the person with a nuclear football by his bedside who might have to respond to Putin in the case of a half-proxy war with a thermonuclear rival? I mean, something completely mad and insane has happened on one side of this aisle.
And not only Biden, but they've put forward Kamala, who's clearly, although she might not have dementia, she's clearly cognitively not up to scratch to be leader of America.
I don't necessarily agree with that. And again, this is going to be an unpopular point of view. She sounds completely batty when you hear her answering questions. What is that exactly? One possibility is that she's just not cognitively capable. Another possibility is that the party doesn't actually make sense anymore. And if you ask a question, you ask it to defend itself, to explain itself. It doesn't have a coherence. It's not a party that says, we're for the working poor, we're for the environment, we believe in free speech, we want to make sure that world trade is free and that shipping lanes are open. It's some bizarre, convoluted series of compromises with various groups. Why are they so focused on the carried interest tax exemption? Why is it so important to privilege a small number of people who have serious gender dysphoria issues over the enormous number of people who go through puberty, are temporarily confused as your body changes, and encouraging them towards irreversible choices that will forever lead to their reproductive mutilation? I mean, how do you defend that? How do you defend the policy on the southern border of the United States? And by the way, I can turn that on the conservatives. The conservatives are to blame for the open border mania, and nobody remembers that. And why is that? Because the Wall Street Journal, never known as a bastion of progressive thought, campaigned for years for a 5-word constitutional amendment.
When was this?
1990s. Uh-huh. There shall be open borders. So if you want to talk about the madness in the southern border of the United States, that was a conservative problem. People so eager to push out the labor supply curve so that when you took supply and demand, the cost, the price point of labor would fall. The mania for open borders came from the desire to destroy the American worker's ability to bargain for wages at the negotiating table. So, as far as people saying, are you conservative? Are you liberal? Are you leftist? Are you reactionary? No, you've all lost your mind. The Democrats have lost their minds somewhat more than the Republicans, but the Republicans are incredibly incoherent. The Democrats have they've gone into a space where they cannot be understood. So when Kamala speaks, we don't know what she's saying. She doesn't know what she's saying. But would you do a better job? Like if I put you, Winston, as an American at the head of the Democratic Party running for president, and I forced you to answer my questions, you'd be tangled like a pretzel. You'd have no ability to respond. So we don't know whether Kamala is stupid, inarticulate, unprepared.
Or the problem is too big for anyone to really be able to
it doesn't
weave through.
That party does not make sense.
What does the future look like for that party? If Kamala wins, she's got to continue that balance for the next 4 years? Or is it an opportunity, if they lose, to rebuild completely? I mean, maybe it should be
We're courting disaster. Let's just be clear about it. Both of these parties are functioning in separate universes, right? And so, in essence, we're not having an election year this year. I don't know what you'd call this thing, but it's not an election. These are two different planets. And I spend time in both Democratic and Republican space. And I'm aghast at both. The Republicans completely close their eyes to the problems of January 6th. They consider Donald Trump's degradation of the norms and standards of the United States to be, you're complaining about mean tweets. It's not mean tweets. It's about bullying. Quite honestly, I don't like bullies. Donald Trump is a bully. Now, the sense is, well, we have to bully because we have to win. And then once we get into the Oval Office, then we'll govern properly. Well, no. This is a Mercutio moment, a plague on both your houses.
Yeah. Not to play whataboutery, but just the way you describe your terrible experience with the press, and I've had similar things, and it's a horrible experience, and it actually feels like a spiritual war when you get tangled up in it on the individual level. But do you not think with someone like Kamala, this week, for example, they've been hammering this Trump is literally Hitler line, just to tie in with your earlier point about the journalists all getting round to journo painting. They all coalesce around certain ideas and they bang them out together. And this week it's been Hitler. Last week it was Testy.
Remember when JD Vance was weird? Everybody said weird.
Everyone said weird. They said joy all at the same time. But also you say you don't like Trump being a bully. Them saying that he's literally Hitler, is that not another form of bullying?
Of course it's a bully.
Yeah, so it's...
Yeah, they just bullied me. I'm not saying that the Democrats aren't bullies. But the idea of we need a bully to beat a bully, it's like, I just want to send all these people to their room without supper. Spare the rod, spoil the child. Who the heck gave us such low-quality candidates? And of course that means I won't get a position in any coming administration, like you're going to ask me to begin with. At some level, this is just a very non-adult campaign.
I think everyone would agree with you on that.
Yeah, well, frankly, the world needs adults, and it needs America to take on an adult role. And we have to look at ourselves. We have to be very muscular, but we have to not be evil. And we have to, we have to set an example for the world as to what free speech means and what democracy is and what differences of opinions should be and what it means to be scientific and not to turn our back on our traditions and spirituality and to use the magic of this land that we have to get people of different backgrounds to sit down and be decent to each other. This is a magical country.
Yeah. Do you take any optimism from the so-called unity project of Trump putting behind him Musk, RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, Vivek Ramaswamy, obviously JD has his Veep, this long group of mainly former Democrats coming around together to clear out the deep state. There's this clear up of government inefficiency. Yes, I agree with you on a surface level. Trump is, almost acting like a comedian rather than a president. But scratch a little bit. For me, that's quite exciting. I'm personally excited by them and that group of people.
Well, there's an exciting idea. I believe my brother sees this as a unity party, and I'm maybe hearkening back to the team of rivals perspective of Lincoln. I would ask somebody who subscribes to that point of view that same question. I don't view that this way. I view it instead as it's an innovation to me that hasn't been tried. So we keep trying to make everything sound like something that happened before. I think what Trump realized is that, he's an innovator. He will take a tradition. He'll see that everybody has always done that tradition. And rather than be the nth person, like throwing out the first pitch at in the baseball season, he'll take the opportunity to say, no, I don't want to do that. He'd rather be the first person not to continue a tradition. And I think that the tradition is that you put out a lawn sign with exactly 2 names in your front yard. And what happens if, for example, you create a new concept, which I've called the traveling Wilburys strategy. So you get Bob Dylan and Tom Petty and George Harrison in the same band, and now, if you think about it, if you have 6 names, you have 6 factorial possibilities to order those names on a lawn sign. I don't think that they did this. Maybe Trump's ego wouldn't put up with it. But imagine that your lawn sign said Tulsi, RFK, Elon, Vivek, Vance, Trump. Like you have Trump at the very bottom of that list. That says to your neighbor, look, I'm not supporting Trump. I see the same problems with his behavior, his age, what have you. But I am supporting the idea that this is a super ticket. And it doesn't stop at president and vice president. Why did anyone have the idea that you only run as a two-person ticket and then you choose your team after you've been elected? So I think it's a genius idea that is incompletely instantiated. I think it's a new idea. I don't think it's a team of rivals, or I think what it is it's a super ticket. And it allows people who cannot vote Trump to vote Trump.
And within it, the ideas that they're talking about, let's say the government efficiency program, RFK Jr. and Nicole Shanahan talking about making America healthy again, they might all have their own fan bases, but those are also, are they not exciting things? Should they be pulled off?
They're great ideas, in general, misinstantiated from my perspective. So for example, let's take vaccines. In general, there is a perspective that says everybody has to get on the vaccine bandwagon. This only works if we all do our bit. We know that it's uncomfortable to get jabbed, but vaccines are a pure good. They're safe, they're effective, they work. And the idea is stop questioning. Do your duty. Okay. The idea has now arisen. Maybe they aren't as safe as we've claimed. Maybe they have more downsides than they've claimed. Maybe we haven't studied them enough. Maybe there's legal immunity for the producers of vaccines because we know that they can't be done as safely as claimed. So people are now waking up to the idea that that is a propaganda campaign. That's different than saying we know vaccines cause autism. Now, maybe they do, and maybe they don't. And I don't know where we are. But I can tell you this. There's certainly enough evidence that we are kept from asking scientific questions because of reasons of, I would say, around the security state. I can tell you we were not encouraged to question whether or not the Wuhan Institute of Virology might be involved in a novel coronavirus coming out of Wuhan, China. The security state has a clear idea that it is allowed to control the narrative, because if it doesn't control the narrative, scientists are going to ask questions. Why is there a furin cleavage site on spike protein in these coronaviruses? That's a very unusual thing. I think it's 4 amino acids, 12 nucleotides in the primary sequence. It's a very strange thing to just suddenly crop up, which is the difference between having a coronavirus be, extremely transmissible among humans and not. We were not encouraged. In fact, they assembled 77 Nobel laureates to be outraged that the EcoHealth Alliance, which itself makes no sense as an extension of the DITRA, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, headed by a Ukrainian zoologist who seems to attract, $50 million in funding for crazy operations, according to something called One Health, which almost certainly looks like a bioweapons convention workaround. Basically, what they're saying is, that thing that killed your great aunt and that got your kids sick and that forced you to get vaccinated and lose your business is above your pay grade to ask about. And say the same thing with food. Can I ask about what's going on with Archer Daniels Midland? I mean, can I ask about Monsanto? Can I ask about the legal liability around vaccines? What we have is a group of people in Washington who say we have a very brittle system and we cannot afford for populists, scientists, journalists to go poking around and asking questions. And so more or less the Democratic Party of the United States is up for keeping that thing going, and these other people are up for questioning it. However, in my opinion, there are a lot of claims that are being bandied about on the Republican side which are not fully substantiated. And what we really need is scientific investigation. We need scientists with a lot of money and a lot of autonomy. And we need the security state to F off. if you just got, tens of millions of people killed because of your science experiment in China, you kind of lost your portfolio. We don't necessarily keep running cover for you, claiming that you've got a hippy dippy charity in New York City, which is with a wildly overpowered board, tons of money, a Ukraine and China connection that makes no sense. All of these Nobel laureates. It's obvious that you're hiding something. We don't know what you're hiding, but you can't spit in all of our faces and tell us that we're all, what was the word they used about Jay Bhattacharya? Fringe epidemiologist Jay Bhattacharya.
Did they really?
Yeah.
How dare they?
Well,
That's
you see, but I'm not going to psychologize you. We are indignant for a reason. We're not having a bad hair day. Who the hell left our security state this incompetent and this much in charge? You're supposed to be good at what you do. You're bad at what you do. The only reason that the rest of us are in your business is that you can't keep your business in your business. If you kept it in your pants, nobody would be trying to pry into what's going on at CIA or Department of Homeland Security or whatever. You're bad at what you do. The security state is bad. It's just not talented. And it's trying to control the rest of us by telling us, don't ask reasonable questions.
You sound like an intellectual, a populist intellectual.
I'm an intellectual.
And you're a populist. This is by definition populist. You have a problem with elite failure across the board.
Do me a favor, Winston. Think about it. I come from the top high school in Los Angeles. I went to an Ivy League undergraduate school. I have a PhD from Harvard, postdoc at MIT, further postdoctoral work at Harvard and the National Bureau of Economic Research. No, I'm the elite. They don't want the elite. I don't know who's in these chairs. I did not come from a populist channel. What happened is Harvard, for example, selected a plagiarist to be its president. My three universities, the University of Pennsylvania, Harvard, and MIT, all could not figure out how to condemn what was being done to endanger and threaten Jewish students on their campuses. Those are my three universities. Do we have a level above this? No. I'm an elitist. I'm trying to restore a public-spirited elite. If that's what you mean by populist, then I think you have a very bad definition of an elite. The elite exists to serve its country. If you have a situation in which you need hostage-taking gunmen in a school taken out, you better get an elite sniper to make sure nobody else gets hurt. If your child is suffering with pediatric oncology and needs to have a tumor removed, you want an elite surgeon. The elite class of a country is supposed to be in service. It's not supposed to be feeding its mouth with both hands at the trough.
Totally agree, but to be populist isn't to be against there being an elite at all. That's communist, I would say, although the communists end up having their own elite. The populist is that the elite class, the current elite class, are failing. Everyone agrees that there needs to be leadership.
The elite are not. We don't have an elite. I will plant my feet here till the cows come home. We need an elite. The elite exists to serve the populace.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Agreed.
That is normal elite behavior.
To serve.
Yes.
And the current behavior is...
You can go full Marie Antoinette if you like. If that's what you want to call the elite, I am certainly not the elite. We need an elite. Look, the reason that we bust our ass and we study morning, noon, and night for years and years and we learn our stuff is to serve. And there are great perks being in the elite. I'm not going to claim that there aren't. But the perks don't really make up the difference in what it takes. When you're a surgeon, it might be great that you have a second or a third home. But you're playing God every day. And people live and die as to whether you screw up. That's not something most people want on their soul. So if you meet an elite surgeon and the person's acting like a bit of an ass and very commandeering and very, I don't know how to put it, like a very commanding personality. That person is that way because any screw-up potentially kills a person on his table who is completely defenseless. And my claim is that people just don't understand what an elite is supposed to be. An elite is supposed to be in service. And are there tons of perks? You better believe there are tons of perks, because the amount of work and the amount of risk and the amount of sacrifice that it takes to get into that position is absolutely enormous. And what we have is an undeserving group of people, what we keep calling the elite, who think that the purpose of those chairs is to feed themselves and to stuff their faces. And I want to see those people out of those chairs. I want to see our elite restored.
And the trust in the elite, because...
The trust will come.
You think it'll come? Do you think it'll be quick to come back?
When you have a commando unit, like our Delta Force, and they make the bad guys go away and they put themselves in harm's way, you immediately trust those guys, right? Mm-hmm. When the Israelis rescued their hostages at Entebbe, it's very hard to pull something like that off. That's what builds trust.
That's actually Netanyahu's polling in Israel over the last year is really a good example of that.
And his brother was the only person to be killed at Entebbe. So, just think about this in terms of sacrifice. Elite is usually about people who have gone through extraordinary sacrifice to be where they are. It's not about people who happen to land in a chair through nepotism.
Earlier, forgive me for going back one step, when you describe your personal experience with the journalistic attack
Sure.
on your name, of course it's bad for America that people don't trust the media or mainstream media, but it is the case that people, particularly Republicans, do not trust the mainstream media, and there's various polling on this. Is that any consolation to you that even though the journalists came after you, most people recognize the bullshit that it is?
No, because we need journalists. In other words, the tear it all down perspective that you now find in the Republican Party is very dangerous. We need papers of record, and we need them to be patriotic. In other words, in a war, you don't want... The only way we kept the secret of the Manhattan Project was through voluntary censorship, because we were a country at war with a political aim to defeat the Nazis in Japan. And the abuse of that, the abuse of journalism, is something that needs to be remediated. We need these institutions. We need universities. We need think tanks. We need news desks. And the fact that these things are all self-discrediting, very often what you see in the Republican Party is just this glee. Oh my God, this is wonderful. Have you seen your popularity and your trust in the polls plummet? And what's that filled by? That's filled by nonsense in podcast space. So podcasts bring real truth, BS. Nobody can tell what's what. Our standards have plummeted. This is, by the way, what Barry Weiss was on about a long time ago. She was saying, look, it's wonderful that you guys are able to do what you're doing in podcast space, but you're not enforcing standards. And so in a weird way, the idea is you have the Wild West of podcast space where there are no standards, and you have very professional journalism, which is in fact infected with journo painting. And, where the security state has a free hand. Right now, Michael Schellenberger and Mike Benz, are two names that I think are doing extraordinary work pointing out what's actually going on by giving you names, dates, storylines. And what you see is that the NPRs and the New York Times and the Washington Posts of the world won't really touch their work. And so this is what's discrediting them. But somebody needs to build an institution that does journalism. We need journalism. And in fact, the Society of Professional Journalism's Code of Ethics would fix journalism if it was enforced.
Your criticism of the podcasting space, which I share. There's a huge variety, but obviously I'm part of the game. I'm very much in that space. That's
Myself
what we're
as well.
doing right now. How much was what you've just described influenced you stopping your show on the portal?
Look, I don't know what I'm doing, to be entirely honest. I seem to have outlived my world. I come from an institutional space. I believe in standards of decency and civility. I now find myself in a world that talks about the dirtbag left or tone policing. We have to be civil and decent to each other. And we have to make sure that we're not constantly pushing our own perspective and our own agenda. What I see is basically people talking their book. They know where their bread is buttered. And I don't know how to be with all of this. If I look at the thumbnails on which I appear, it's always, the world will end unless we do this. Yeah. And
you won't believe this.
His jaw dropped when Eric said, and I'm embarrassed. If you don't do that, then the algorithms will starve you. If you speak the truth, the algorithms will cheat you of your income, will demonetize, as they say, your ability to feed your family. I come from a different planet. It wasn't perfect. It was never fair. But it was so much better than this. We were on the right path. We were decent enough people. Life has become like a schoolyard. With all the schoolyard bullying and the taunts, and our music, sounds like schoolyard taunts, and everybody's just insulting each other's masculinity or femininity, or you're ugly, or you're failed, or you're a grifter, you're a charlatan, you're this or that. This is my only chance to be on planet Earth. And there's so much that I love about this place. And I'm just disgusted with us. And I'm not smart enough to figure out how to undo it. I don't want to be part of this, just...
The war.
It's such a waste of my life. I mean, I can define male and female in about 2 minutes. And I can tell you that we have to be good to each other. I can tell you that we got male homosexuality wrong for years, and that we've overcorrected, and we're making a tremendously terrible decision about initiating a reproductive holocaust against our own children. I want us to be decent to each other, and I want to make sure that our younger people have a stake in the future. Konstantin Kisin said something, and I forget exactly how it goes, but I think it was at ARC. Something like, I'm not a conservative, but I can give my conservative friends a piece of advice. You can't ask young people to conserve something that they're not allowed to participate in. There are a lot of 33 and 34-year-old millennials who need to get married and need a future and need a house and need a baby in their arms. And I don't want to be told that I'm backwards. I know what I'm talking about. This is just human nature. We need inspiring young men with futures and careers. We need to more or less stop entertaining politicians over the age of 70. We need to gradually phase them out because they don't have that much time left. We never had a president this old.
Why does that matter, that they're old? I mean, I understand if they're in cognitive decline, like Biden, but,
Why does it matter if you can code? Why does it matter if you understand the physics of ballistic missiles that deliver thermonuclear warheads? Why does it matter if you understand markets and Black-Scholes Merton and option pricing? This is a demanding world, and it should be filled with public-spirited, very capable technical people. It should be, you should be able to know that something is wrong by how little we're discussing AI in this election cycle. AI is a tsunami that is about to crash over our world. And the amount of time we've been spending talking about Arnold Palmer and who's cucked and who called who a name last week, You're talking about a technology that can probably replace 85% of the jobs out there without even any improvement.
I want to talk about AI, but I just want to make one pushback on my last comment, was that you are wiser now, I imagine you would say, than you were when you were 25 or when you were 35. So there's nothing wrong necessarily being the age itself, right? Presumably older people are wiser.
You get wiser, but see, I've also been in a bubble my entire life. The entire period of my life from 1965 until the present has been lived within an anomalous bubble that will never occur again. If you like, post-1945, or certainly post-1952, which is when we had the hydrogen bomb, the world has been abnormally quiet.
Yeah.
This is not real life. Real life is just getting started.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I talk about is that Vesuvius used to erupt in Europe all the time. And I think its last eruption grounded planes in World War II, and then it stopped erupting. So the entire jet age took place without ash plumes to be negotiated, which is when Eyjafjallajökull in Iceland blew. Nobody knew whether the planes were safe. Like, it's just been a quiet time. We haven't had a major pandemic. I mean, I grew up with the Hong Kong flu in the late 60s, where I think Woodstock was held during the Hong Kong flu. It's a forgotten pandemic. But by the standards of the Black Death or the Spanish flu or all these sorts of things, this has been a walk in the park. The only really great disaster by earlier standards has been Mao's Great Leap Forward. So one thing is, I'm old. Now, I try to be with it, try to be up with the technology. I think I'm a pretty good late life learner. But if I gave a pop quiz to Kamala Harris and Donald Trump and I said, describe the transformer architecture in the 2017 paper, Attention is All You Need, and describe what an attention head is and why it changed everything, do you think they'd have a clue?
But you think they need to?
Hello? Are you going to ban linear algebra? Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz had a podcast where they talked about a meeting at the White House where the question is, do you regulate the technology or do you regulate the science that produced the technology? People are talking about banning linear algebra. They claim that the White House said, we will ban the math if we need to. We made entire fields of theoretical physics disappear. We're not talking about that, are we? Yeah, Winston, the questions are wrong. This is a technological age. We're about to have a technological collision. I need a president who understands why the CPI was broken by two senators named Moynihan and Packwood in the mid-1990s using 5 academics, including Zvi Grilikus, Dale Jorgensen, I can't remember her last name, Robert Gordon, and Michael Boskin. Who the hell is the Boskin Commission? Why are we not revisiting chained indices, seasonal adjustments, looped preferences, unstable preference? Trillions of dollars go back and forth over this. I've been trying to talk about this since the 1990s. You can't talk to anyone about the fact that the CPI was used to raise taxes and slash benefits because tax brackets are indexed to it and Social Security and Medicare are indexed to it. You know, it's like a perfect crime. You're stealing trillions of dollars. Everybody's experiencing higher prices. It's not being reflected in the gauge. And you can't get into the game to have the conversation because anyone who's an expert is compromised. No, you need technical, political people. And I hope that I don't know anyone on the Democratic side of the aisle. It's my party, and they never reach out. They don't ask questions. I know 3 of the 6, or if you include Nicole Shanahan, I know 4 out of the 7 on the Republican side. And you better believe I'm going to Bobby, Tulsi, JD Vance, Nicole, and now Elon and I have started corresponding, which is nobody's business as to what we're saying. But yeah, you need smart people who are not compromised by this. You need an elite class of technically minded people who know where the bodies are buried And you need to throw these people who have been running the show from inside the Department of Homeland Security, inside of the State Department, in the intelligence communities, the various law enforcement agencies. We cannot harass Americans to a brighter, freer future.
So you mentioned AI, and I think this ties in with some of the thinking I've been having recently, which there's the famous quote by Andrew Breitbart, which is that politics is downstream from culture. And it seems to me that politics and culture are downstream from tech. And so I share your concern for AI, although actually I probably don't know AI well enough, but I share the opinion that AI is an extremely significant thing for us to be discussing, and it's not given nearly enough airtime. Yeah. I'm curious to know why you think AI, and forgive me, maybe this is something you've talked about a lot, but it's something I've heard.
Please.
Why do you think AI is the way you put it there seemed dangerous to me.
First of all, without going all Skynet, and talking about it taking over in that respect, our labor market, think about the importance of markets. We have an invisible web that directs our actions. It tells us how we should devote our time and our energy on this planet. And if that delicate filigree of markets were to break down, you would need command and control. You would need somebody telling you, wake up, go to this quarry, and mine this limestone or whatever. We don't want that. We want markets. But markets are predicated on certain assumptions, and one of which is that the marginal product of labor, whatever determines the wage, is sufficient for a standard of living that's consistent with dignity. What is AI? We have a model of production, its most boring terms, where you have two inputs, one called K and one called L, capital and labor. What you're talking about is a technology that does not allow labor to move to a more productive place. Like if you're washing dishes, you say, look, I'm also writing poetry in my head. I'd rather spend more of my time doing something elevated rather than doing something that's purely mechanical. So you get a dishwashing machine. You say, okay, my labor is freed. Now I can become an accountant or a poet, or I can start a company or who knows what. What happens when you have a technology that replaces all repetitive behaviors? Anything that can be done repetitively, like writing news stories, can be replaced by an AI. Mm-hmm. Now what are you doing? You're chasing people out of expertise, because that's what we know how to do. We know how to educate for people to do something over and over again. We know how to make you a tax lawyer. We know how to make you an accountant. We know how to teach you how to be a surgeon. What we don't know how to do is teach people how to do one-off things that have never occurred. Right? And so in a certain sense, AI is threatening to completely decimate L and the input of the production function. So you have something that behaves not as a complement, and my wife has coined this very important concept, the golden age of AI complementarity. For a brief period of time, the AI is not going to be good enough to do all of its work on its own. And so you'll have a prompt engineer as a human being directing the AI so that it can check whether the AI is hallucinating, whether it's actually putting together the right series of tasks, whether it's misinterpreting a command. But that's going to come to an end. There's something called cyborg chess, where first you had humans who played chess and all the humans were better than a computer. Then you had computers that could beat the humans sometimes. Then you had computers that could beat the humans all the time, but it was still better to have a human together with a computer. At some point, the human is just an albatross around the neck of a computer. Computer does not need my help adding numbers. I just get in the way. Right?
So what is the danger for everyday Americans in that sense? Because just as the dishwasher meant that women were freed up in time so they could do other things around the house, they could spend more time with children, and all this tech has actually helped humankind. Why is this tech different? Doesn't it mean that human labor will be freed up, human time will be freed up so that it could be applied to things that humans deem more important.
Sure, if the idea is that you can allocate resources so that humans can enjoy their time doing things that they value more. But if you have no one with an ability to earn a living, but their time is their own, that's not a very dignified existence. In fact, of all people, the only person who's really come up with a great idea around this isn't being listened to.
Who's that?
Nicole Shanahan.
And what's her idea?
Nicole Shanahan's idea, and this dovetails with work that I've been doing with Pia Milani and also talked to Jay Bhattacharya about, is Coasian solutions to the coming AI tsunami crushing our labor market. And effectively, if you think about the AI as foreign labor, I wrote a paper years ago through the International Labor Office of the United Nations in Geneva, which said that if you want to import labor into a country, you should have to pay the workers licensing income because their wages will go down in that area, but it has to be offset by the licensing income that would go up, which would put workers in control of how much they wished to have their labor market invaded. If you applied that here, you actually have a solution that dwarfs UBI, which is an extremely crude tool in terms of efficiency. And you would give the workers who are about to be displaced the right to license their employer's right to use AI to displace them. And what you'd get what would be called a Pareto improvement in the labor market. Nobody's talking about this. UBI is going to just decimate workers and give them a pittance of what they're owed. And the only person in this campaign to raise this got completely ignored.
Nicole. But she is still she's still loosely affiliated now with the Trump campaign through RFK Jr. So she's not.
Let's put it this way. Nicole, I'm a huge fan of Coasian analysis. It's the most profound idea to come out of economics that I've ever encountered.
I don't know what that is, sorry.
Ronald Coase came up with a crazy idea, which is that if you have a lake, for example, and you have the need of a furniture factory which pollutes into the lake, and you have fishermen who need to fish the lake, that you can assign rights to pollute the lake and give them either to the fishermen to sell to the furniture factory or give them to the furniture factory and allow the fishermen to buy them back. And no matter what you do, you get the same use of the lake, although it will affect whether the fishermen become rich or the furniture factory becomes rich. So the idea is it's an efficient solution through the assigning of property rights to use market solutions that do not necessarily benefit the elite. You can give the rights to the poor and have the rich purchase them. And therefore, you decouple efficiency from inequality. And Nicole is the only person who got it. So I was working on this shortly after the turn of the century to try to stop the conservative movement to open borders. And Nicole is entirely correct that this is the right approach to AI. It's not UBI. It's Coasian analysis.
But sorry, just maybe I'm being slow here, but you earlier showed some annoyance that no one in the presidential election was showing any concern for this. But you've now said that Nicole is.
Bobby is showing concern about health, as is Nicole. Elon is showing concern about government efficiency.
And AI.
My concern, though, is the instantiations are all wrong. Obviously, you're not supposed to have a Department of Government Efficiency which spells out Doge as an acronym where you hold a position in a meme coin. No, you guys all think it's funny. It is funny.
Yeah.
It's totally unethical. It's brilliant. We love Elon, but that's a bad thing because it erodes our norms.
Now, is it because the concerns of the people, like AI isn't high on the hierarchy of
That's
concerns
what I'm trying to
of
say.
the people? Yeah.
Nicole is barely in this group of 6. She's the 7th person in this 6-person group. There are many other people who are not being named. And I'm just trying to use our time here to say somebody said something really important. And people think Nicole Shanahan, oh, she's the money behind Bobby Kennedy. You know, she's where she is through marriage. I'm telling you something different. You know, you're getting something wrong. Somebody said something profound about AI. And I agree with her, and I was on the same page with her 25 years ago because this is what's supposed to fix the border. Nobody's listening. My guess is that even if Nicole is part of this group of people who get into power, we're going to get UBI rather than COAS.
Why so?
I don't know. There's something about we do things that are like UBI has a name.
Yeah.
Nobody knows what COAS is. UBI is dumb. COAS is brilliant.
But UBI's household name.
Yeah.
Do you think there'd be appetite for UBI even amongst conservatives?
I think that nobody wants a revolution who's smart. Do you want to throw everybody out of work?
I guess you could say for the brief period that Trump was governing during COVID, he did he gave everyone, what was it, $500, $1,000 or something like that?
This is the kind of stuff that flies in Washington. No, we need smart people. I don't mean to be rude about it. COAS is smart. UBI is like a knuckle dragging.
Why don't you like UBI?
Because you're taking something with the dignity of a human being and you're saying, here's a handout. You're not saying, here's an owner. And you're asking to purchase that person's rights as a citizen. And that person is fully capable of figuring out how much they want to sell to you. You're taking a person, a citizen, and turning him into a child. Here, you're useless. Here's $5. Go powder your nose. No, thank you. I'm an owner. Meet me at the bargaining table. Let's negotiate. How much AI do you want to bring into this workplace?
As a progressive, if you don't mind me saying that, but at least a former Democrat or a liberal.
I'm right now arguing on behalf of the workers, and nobody.
But against UBI, which is very popular amongst liberals. And
I can't do this, Winston. Look, UBI is popular because nobody's ever heard of COAS.
Where would you draw the line between these and other welfare? Your problems with, let's say, UBI, why would that be a problem and not other forms of welfare be a problem?
I don't like welfare. I like markets. The core of progressive means progress. It means elevating people. It means making the world a better place. If you're not pro-market, you're not a progressive. Being pro-communism isn't progressive. It means, like, I didn't pay attention to what happened in the 20th century. The point is to lift people up. You want to know what lifts people up? Markets, dignity, the ability to profit, to win, to gain wealth. The people who claim to be pro-free market are not. They are pro-corporate handout. Mm-hmm. They are socialists. I wish to defeat socialists everywhere I can find them. And I'd love to start with corporate America.
Or worse, fascist. I mean, that's closer to the fascist than the socialist definition.
Well, you know what they say. True fascism has never been tried.
You know, my country right now, young people, socialism has a popularity rating of something like 66, 67%. It's exactly where the future is.
So deal people into capitalism and watch that fall away. But when you don't deal people into capitalism...
As Constantine said, yeah.
Yeah, but this is what I'm trying to say. What you call progressives, I don't know who these people are. I don't know which mental disease they picked up. The blue hair, the strangeness, I have nothing to do with those people. You know, I'm worried about your country a great deal. Mm-hmm. What's going on over there?
It's a total disaster. What's going on over there?
Snap out of it.
What significant is England to the American mind?
Oh, this is like asking what importance are Jews to Christians. You know, you have this relationship between things that are older and things that are younger. And sometimes things that are younger are more vital and they get huge. So just the way Christianity is Judaism's larger, more successful younger sibling, so I would like to say the U.S. Is to the U.K. And the U.K. is very important to the U.S. It's essential to the U.S. We may not like to admit it. There's a rivalry. We're kind of pissed off about some stuff you guys did in the 1700s, but we'll let it slide. But it is a special relationship. And you guys are supposed to provide certain things to the potluck that we're supposed to provide others. You're in charge of the language, more or less. You're in charge of certain sensibilities. That stiff upper lip thing is really important as a cultural touch point. There are all of these essential things that the UK provides to the world, and it increasingly looks like you're not interested or willing to provide it anymore, and I guess we're confused.
There's a movement what I see on the right of American politics, which you might say the libertarian right or the protectionist America First right. And it's with regards to Ukraine, Israel, but I think it might apply in this conversation more abstractly to England, which is that, so what about the rest of the world? So what about the rest of the West? It's not our business. Let them get on with it. And I think you could actually probably trace it back to this sort of history of neo-reactionary conservative movement in this country.
You mean in the U.S. we have two beautiful oceans, so we should ignore everything that doesn't concern us directly?
Why give our money to this far-off war that we don't care about? This is what I believe our mutual friend Douglas Murray, his new book is about the significance of Israel. If Israel falls, does the West fall? I wonder what your opinion on this. That how important is Europe to America? How important is Israel? How important is England to America? If England falls, which might sound ludicrous if you're hearing it, but
define England falling. That's really important. In other words, we have a group of people who say things like, Wisconsin is lost. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, so you might say England's just changing. So what? It's just changing. England's always been changing. That's
not what I'm saying. I'm saying define what it means for England to fall. I have a very clear idea of what we need from England. Whether you wish to provide it or not, that's your own business in some sense, but I would like to think you have responsibilities. We depend upon you for wit, ingenuity, brilliance, tolerance of idiosyncrasies, particularly in science. You better keep Cambridge and Oxford humming. Make sure you know how to speak your own language. Teach it to us. You're better at it than we are. There's an English tradition of letters. If we need to be corrected, we're looking to you. Not often, but sometimes we get out of our minds, you know. There's a really important, rich relationship.
So actually it's cultural.
Hugely.
Yeah.
But it's also technical.
How technical?
I don't know. Where does deep mind come from?
What does deep mind mean?
The company, the AI company.
Right.
No. Look, as an academic, we depend on the UK hitting and punching above its weight. And we expect you to be elitist, and we expect you to succeed and to do the impossible. You know, British Special Forces are ranked where in the world? Way up at the top. You guys are great at what you do in so many ways. And what we're talking about is a potential cultural Suez crisis to follow the original Suez crisis, and we don't want that.
I mean, I think that's already underway.
Well, then stop it. Bring back the wit of Monty Python and Flanders and Swan and Gilbert and Sullivan. Bring back the science of Michael Atiyeh and Paul Dirac. Give us more Roger Penrose. What are you doing?
You mentioned before. Sorry.
I mean, just look. Let's just talk about wine and blues for the moment. You guys didn't come up with the blues. And when you first got your hands on the blues, it sucked. It was called skiffle.
Skiffle did not suck, but we'll put a pin on that for later.
I look forward to it. And you can't make wine because your climate is lousy for it. Unless there's big climate change, you're not making your own.
We've got plans for climate change,
Okay.
but we'll come back to that as well.
Well, the point is the French knew how to make wine, but they basically consumed it locally. And when those bottles found their way across the channel, the Brits started, turning it into a parlor game. Could you guess what year? Could you guess which vineyard? How oaked were the barrels? All of these sorts of things, about the fine points of wine or whatever it is. And the same thing was true for the blues. I mean, we got up to Buddy Guy, I would say, right? And that came over, and the Brits said, oh, this is interesting. Maybe this is a virtuosic art form. And we're going to give it to John Mayall and have him teach, or Alexis Corner and teach Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page, and of all these people, Jeff Beck. And then it took Jimi Hendrix coming over to the UK to actually get appreciated. Okay, so in both, just as an example, in both the case of wine and the blues, England plays this incredible role by taking something that people hadn't been valuing, curating it properly, and elevating it, to the level of the highest art.
There's something about it's easier to identify what another nation is from the outside, and I think with the blues, part of it, it's a complex thing, but part of it is that from the distance of not being part of American culture, perhaps those early British bluesmen were able to identify the essence, the most significant essence of it, and then it went through the British system. Another aspect of it is that British music is a lot more song-orientated than American music, and part of that is because you can't tour England that long before you run out of towns, whereas America you can tour endlessly, so you have this band culture and vibe, whereas in England it's more song. So there's a kind of a change there in the processing of the blues.
But it's also brilliance, and you guys are ashamed about this.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
So
you have the opposite problem in America. No, we have tall poppy syndrome. It's a classic thing.
Yeah, so
this is why people are leaving Britain now in flocks. They're leaving
okay,
to...
all right, but get over it. Newton did not come from Colorado. And by the way, Michael Atiyeh, the name Atiyeh is not it's not Wigglesbottom or something crazy like that. It's an Arabic name. Dirac is a French name. All sorts of people who came from somewhere else found a permanent place in human history in the UK. And it just bothers me. I went to a meeting at Ditchley. Have you ever been to Ditchley?
No, where's that?
Some estate outside Oxfordshire that Winston Churchill was associated with. And there were a lot of British Foreign Service people. They were all fabulously educated. They were very conversant in everything. And they all were moping about, somehow the loss of empire. If you think about James Bond was coping with the loss of empire. It was saying, okay, maybe we're no longer that thing that rules the world, but at least we have class and ingenuity, and we can do things that no one else can do. And, Felix in the CIA was always kind of trying to help James, but James could do it all on his own, right? And that kind of British cowboy culture embodied in James Bond was really important. And I just love that stuff. You guys tolerate eccentrics like nobody else. It's just such a genius way to be. Thank you for Freeman Dyson. Guy didn't have a PhD in math or physics. He was both a mathematician and a physicist. Send us more eccentrics and receive more of our people, you know?
Our eccentrics tend to thrive better in your country because we're not good to eccentrics.
I don't know. We sent a guy from Missouri, turned out to be able to write some poetry over in the UK. I don't know. It's a good relationship, and it's back and forth. And I just feel like we're not ourselves. And you guys don't have, in my opinion, you don't have the right to screw this thing up as badly as you're screwing it up.
It might sound dramatic, and in fact, it will definitely sound dramatic to some listeners. It could be that we're looking at a period where, like Rome fell, but then we saw the empire continue in Constantinople for another 1,000 years. It could be that sort of period for the West, where some of these countries in Europe are really struggling. And it might be that the spirit of the West continues in America. Does that sound ridiculous to you?
Yeah. You guys got to get over yourselves. Shake it off. Get back in the game. This is enough. You know, it's funny. Somehow we got Douglas Murray and Andrew Doyle to St. Helena for a week. So here we are on like the second most remote inhabited island in the world. Continuously for some long period of time. And I'm just listening to these two guys who we know from Titania McGrath in the case of Andrew Doyle and Douglas Murray for all his being a war correspondent and all of this sort of cultural commentary. And I just got a chance to listen to these guys discuss Bartók and Milton and Sondheim's lyrics, poetry, food. They're just such delightfully educated, thoughtful, funny. Getting drunk with the two of them is, one of the best. Douglas has to be my favorite drinking buddy on earth.
Yeah. These
are incredibly courageous, really deep people who are motivated by their cultural canons. They know their history. And we've got, like, in the case of Douglas, we've got precisely one of this human being. And we need an army of them. Send us more.
They are once in a generation, but great example. Douglas spends a lot, maybe most of his time in America.
If not Israel.
If not Israel. So our once-in-a-generation talents, like these people, are moving...
They shouldn't be once-in-a-generation talents. I mean, the first thing I'm going to say is, as brilliant as Elon is, if Elon's doing all of this, it's not because it's Elon, it's because the rest of us are just failing. And if you only have one Douglas Murray to send us, that's unforgivable. You need to send us a large number of these people, and they should have political disagreements among themselves, right? Mm-hmm. I would love to hear a more left-wing version of Douglas Murray debating a more right-wing version of Douglas Murray. We can't just have one Douglas Murray carrying the banner of the West. You guys have to figure out also how to stand up for the West in an attractive fashion.
You think it's unattractive?
Well, my claim is that the Rivers of Blood speech was an attempt to talk about something and to do it in a fashion that was so controversial and so polarizing that it didn't get at the reasonable parts of what it was trying to address, which is it's meaningful for Britain to be British and England to be English and Wales to be Welsh. It can't be that it's some sort of, genetic blood and soil thing, because there's always been a lot of cross-pollination to the point we were just talking about Atiyah or Disraeli or Dirac or what have you.
It can't be a genetic blood and soil thing.
But it can be a software thing.
I think that's exactly the word I was going to use. Yeah. It's a software thing. It's a culture thing. Unfortunately, at the moment, even conservatives can't have the courage to say that, to say there is a software
because
that is
the hardware part of it is ugly.
I mean, there's a hardware part as well. Just as there's
genes
ethnically Jews, there's ethnically English. Like if you come to America, there are people here who are, the Anglo-Saxons. It's considered an ethnicity.
I understand that, but nobody's going to look. the part of the UK that's worth defending is this genius culture. And if you don't know what it is, like we were talking before about, I said, everyone should know a little bit of Middle English, and everybody's supposed to know the opening lines of Chaucer. And
which, amazingly, you know.
But to me, that was normal. That was part of what we in the provinces, we in the colonies, know that it's important to know something about UK history and culture. And so we learn it. And, you know, I made the comment that if you don't know the first lines, which, you know, refer to what's happening in the month of April, you can't understand the first lines of The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, because that's what he's referencing. And so there's this web of cultural references that are necessary to have something to protect. And I think one of the reasons that Douglas, for example, is so effective in standing up for the UK and British culture is that you need to know what it is you're protecting.
Mm.
You know, so this comment that I made to you that when Nat King Cole does a swinging jazz version of a song called Summer Is Coming In, he's referring to the oldest song that's extant in the English language, which is Summer Is Coming In, you know, and it's just like Sweetly Sings Cuckoo. That thing, Nat King Cole, you know, who's a black American, is referencing some sort of, I assume Anglo-Saxon ancient song. And I think I was playing for you in the car ride over. One of my favorite songs in the world is the song "We Be Soldiers 3" from Ravenscroft in 1609. And, you know, I grew up thinking about the Deller Consort as this amazing, you know, musical ensemble. I don't meet people from the UK who are even aware of that. Or I mentioned Flanders and Swan. You know, if I said, have some Madeira, does that reference mean anything? Or the hippopotamus is no ignoramus. You know, all of these things that inspired Tom Lehrer in the States, you know, to comparable levels of musical comedy and brilliance. We don't know our own history, so we're not defending it. We don't have a canon. And I think you guys are responsible for some of that degradation. That's on you. I don't know why you let it happen.
It's been an absolute failure of education. Although I'm not totally convinced when you use the pronoun "we" there. I don't think it's typical, your knowledge of the English canon to most Americans, certainly not even to most English. So where did that come from? It didn't come from school. That's come from your
Some
own.
of it comes
You're
from
an
school.
Anglophile.
No. Some of that comes from school. Everyone who graduated my high school can say, "One that April with the shorter sota, the drocht of March is persa to the rota, and bathed every vein and switch the coup of which whereto engendered is the floor." We all had to learn that.
What high school? I mean, that's an unbelievable education if you got that. What high school was that?
It doesn't matter.
But that's not a regular high school.
It was important. It was important that we understood that we were part of a tradition. It was important that we are connected to you. And the less you are connected to yourselves, the less appealing it is to continue to be connected to you. Right? Because there's always the possibility that when a brash 20-something like Jim Watson goes to England and encounters a bizarre 35-year-old Francis Crick, that a great partnership could mean something. You know, and I tell this story, and it's really important to me, that I had Jim Watson, who's now a bit of an ass, but the legacy of Jim Watson is far too important to be entrusted to Jim Watson. And he was in my office, and I said, "Look, we've been hanging out for a few days. I want to play you some video of Francis Crick." And I hit the play button, and I watched him go into rapture. You know, it was just like he had met his old friend again on my monitor. And I'd been saving up this question, which was very dangerous. So I could see that he was, you know, just in a state of reverie, lost hearing Francis's voice. And it was kind of odd because I was in the room and I felt like I didn't belong there. I said, Jim, do you mind if I ask you a question? He says, no, go ahead. I said, what are you experiencing? He said, it's just wonderful to hear Francis's voice again. And I said, I read your book very carefully. I said, it's probably one of the greatest books written in the English language. It just happens to be written by one of the greatest scientists in the world. You're very clear that you figured out the complementary relations between the nucleotides when a guy named Jerry Donahue told you that all of the books were wrong and that there was a hydrogen atom in the wrong place. And you figured out the equimolar relations of Chargaff, and you came up with the pairing. Didn't you really discover the secret of DNA and you enlarged it to Watson and Crick? And he looked at me. He said, oh, no. I said, did I get that wrong? He said, no, you're exactly right. The inside of DNA was all me. He said, but the sugar phosphate backbone on the outside that twirls around is all Francis. And I thought about that. The world's greatest partnership is visually lost on us. The inside of it is Jim Watson. The outside of it is Francis Crick. And it's the U.S. and the U.K. intertwined forever. And, you know, if you talk about pilgrimages, there are a couple pilgrimages that are really worth doing. One is the Eagle Pub, where they burst in and said, we've discovered the secret of life. We talk about great science tourism. That's certainly one. The other...
And where is that?
Oh, I guess it's in Cambridge. I don't remember where. And the other one is this clock, which is sort of garish. I think it has a grasshopper on the top of it. And I don't know, it was made for $1 million or £1 million. But what it is it's the grasshopper escapement of Harrison, who won the longitude prize because you needed to tell what time of day it was to navigate at sea so you didn't have to use dead reckoning. But all of the grandfather clocks with their pendulums were thrown off by the rocking of a boat. And so it's the invention of a timepiece that allows you to navigate using the stars at sea. I'm in love with the UK, and I'm really disturbed that you guys don't value yourselves, and I don't know what to do about it. I think you need somebody to kick your ass from outside. Yeah.
Things might get a lot more desperate, and that tends to be. I mean, that's what happened before Maggie Thatcher came to power. So maybe that's what will happen again.
You guys have to be decent about whatever comes, and it's not going to be easy.
You have to forgive me, actually. You wanted to talk about fashion. Apparently, you're a great lover of fashion.
No, you can't do it that way. No, I said no one. That's not fair. I said no one ever asks me about fashion.
It was a very sweet moment in the car. I think it was in the car, or maybe it was when we arrived here, that you said people never ask you about fashion. But that's very curious. I would never have expected you to make a statement like that. And why is fashion important to you?
I think it's emblematic of the fact that everything important should be of interest. And what I was trying to get at was actually just that I get asked the same set of questions because people say, oh, you're a mathematician, we can talk to you about math. Or you're a cultural commentator, we can talk to you about what's going on in politics. But people don't ask questions like, do you have opinions on interior design? Or what do you think about is wrong with child rearing? Or anything like that. So you get locked into the same set of questions. And oddly, one of the things I find fascinating is that we are sheepish about fashion. Everyone clearly cares about it. But it's a guilty pleasure as opposed to something that you can measure in terms of the economic activity that's devoted to it or the amount of time and bandwidth that we devote to it. And what's fascinating to me is that we don't recognize that it's great fashion houses tend to be founded on engineering breakthroughs.
This is my thesis from earlier.
Say more.
Culture and politics are downstream from tech. The big example, the famous example will be Martin Luther following the printing press and then the bloody wars that followed that. In music, for example, 1951, the Telecaster was invented. Before the Telecaster, Do you know what the biggest selling instrument was in America?
Mandolin?
It was the banjo.
Banjo.
The banjo was the biggest selling instrument ahead of guitar because it was the loudest. The Telecaster comes along. Not only does it wipe out banjo sales, but look at the charts. It all becomes electronic music. The same thing happens in the 80s with the synthesizer. It's not that the music needed pop culture wanted a synthesizer. It's that the synthesizer came up and then influenced the music that followed. And I could give many other examples of this. But tech, fashion, culture, politics are all downstream from tech. That's.
So my understanding was that the original problem is that a guitar couldn't stand up to the rest of a band. It would get drowned out.
Exactly right.
So then the idea was we want to amplify the guitar. And in the process of that, you found that you had a feedback problem. So the hollow bodies had a problem. And you had to put in a block, and so you got the semi-hollow bodies. And then Leo Fender had a crazy idea. And Leo Fender's crazy idea was, I think, referred to by the Gibson company as the plank guitar, where the idea is it was just a slab of wood with pickups because you didn't really need it to be a guitar in the standard sense. So what started off as the Broadcaster became the Telecaster, still sort of regarded as kind of the most universal of electric guitars. And then after some period of time, when Fender was focused on getting the cleanest tone possible, it gradually came to be understood by Dave Davies of the Kinks and Jimi Hendrix that dirt in the sound was actually magical. Mm-hmm. And so Dave Davies apparently slashed the cone of his amp on You Really Got Me to get that kind of, the guttural, driven sound, because violence, of course, is what's necessary for a creative birth. And then Hendrix requested that his amps be built with high gain and distortion into it because he viewed the amp as the most important part of the guitar system. It was the guitar was the controller and the amp was the instrument. Mm. So, that evolution from Charlie Christian through, and Wes Montgomery and Joe Pass into Dave Davies and Jimi Hendrix, that's like an amazing story. But the odd part about it is that the mandolin, which is what Gibson originally produced.
This is your grandfather's mandolin?
This is my grandfather's mandolin. And the Italians have these beautiful bowl-back ribbed mandolins. The problem is that it rotates out from under you. And so Gibson, I think, was the original innovator of the flat-backed mandolin. I could have that wrong. And there was a group, I think, called the Spanish Students who toured the U.S., and women would swoon for their mandolin virtuosity. And there was a war sort of between the mandolin and the guitar for preeminence. Huh. And that the guitar, in some sense, is the great compromise instrument. But there's always a sweetness to the mandolin. When I found out that you actually compose and write on mandolin, because we associate you with the banjo, and if not the banjo, then with the guitar, I was just fascinated. What's your feeling about the mandolin?
It was a very practical instrument for writing because it's so small, so it's easy to travel around. The banjo, lugging a banjo around is a pain in the arse. It weighs a ton. It annoys everyone and it invites ridicule. The mandolin, by contrast, you can literally fit it in your suitcase. But also the register of it, for me, for my voice, I always found it easy to sing with. So I sort of love this. This is part of the. You said it was 1930s.
I think so.
So this would have been the beginning of mass production instruments at the same time as the Stella guitar in America.
Ming Kwok, who owns Heritage and Harmony, said that the brand in the A-hole, it's an A-style mandolin.
Excuse me.
A-style mandolin with an
Orpheus mandolin.
That Orpheus was a rebrand of a Harmony product, and my grandfather played that, and that was his principal instrument. And the odd thing about it is that because it has no sustain, really, because of the short strings, the tremolo that you get from just sitting on one pair of doubled strings and going back and forth sustains the note rather than letting the note ring out only to gradually decay. So in some sense, what you're doing is you're replacing the bowing motion with very fast back
Staccato
and forth.
versus legato.
Right.
Yeah. So what do you know about your grandfather playing this instrument?
Oh, well,
Was he playing it? Was he a proper player, or was it a fun thing? Or
well, he would do things. See, I don't really know how to play it, but he would do and he would play like old Italian songs, Come Back to Sorrento, or he would sing, "Oh, Patty dear, and did you hear the news that's going around? The shamrock is forbid by law to grow on Irish ground." And it was a means of transmitting, in fact, there's one thing he would do. He would go, we never knew what that was, some Russian thing.
yeah.
And I've never known what that is a fragment of, but he would sit and he'd play any song. You could pick out a tune. It was great because if you're melodically oriented, it's not like the guitar where you're just plucking one note at a time. It lends itself, because it's a manual violin, if you will. It is largely a monophonic instrument, the way a violin, aside from occasional double stops, is largely one note at a time. And I'm just sad in some sense that I don't see more people falling in love with it. When we have these great recording artists like Sierra Dawn Hull, you were talking about Chris, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Thiele?
Chris Thiele, yeah, from Nickel Creek, and not Nickelback, Nickel Creek, and then the Punch Brothers, yeah.
Or David Grisman, all of these genius mandolin players. I'm just always sad that we don't talk about mandolin, the mandolin family, the mandola, the octave mandolin, the Irish bouzouki,
Yeah.
The difference between F-style and A-style mandolins, archtop, things that look like guitars. And I chanced upon this, group of sort of troubadours when I was going to the Festival of Arts, Institute for Arts and Ideas in Hay in Wales. And I saw this beautiful archtop carved guitar, and I realized too many strings. And it's not a 12-string guitar. I said, holy cow, I'm looking at something like an archtop mandocello. And the octave mandolin and the mandocello are they're like the oud. They're somehow exactly in this resonant range that, you could hear like the Bach cello suites on them, or you could hear, they just speak directly to the soul. And these instruments are totally neglected. I can go a lifetime without running into an octave mandolin or a mandocello. And if you've never seen did you ever see a mandolin orchestra where all of the violins are replaced by mandolins and mandolas replace the violas? And
wow.
Oh, so many beautiful things that just somehow got lost.
Is mandolin a big part of Jewish music?
It's interesting. In India, in Bollywood, I believe the Jews brought the mandolin to Bollywood. I think it lends itself, if you're trained in violin, you can easily convert what you know to mandolin. But I was plugging in with the Indian Jewish heritage of Bollywood, and there's a wonderful film called Dilwale Dulhania Le Jayenge, DDLJ, in which the main character, played by Shah Rukh Khan, plays the mandolin, and it just has this kind of it's a great love story, and the mandolin figures prominently in it. And it was one of these places where wherever the mandolin is heard, whether it's in, I don't know, Maggie May with Rod Stewart, or the Goo Goo Dolls' Iris, every place it occurs, it just carries a sweetness to it.
Yeah.
Will you play something for me?
Well, no, you should be...
No.
But you said earlier that your grandfather was playing a Russian tune. Was he Russian? Was he...
His family came from Riga in Latvia and from places in Russia. And
was he born in America?
yes, he was.
But that culture came with him?
Sure. But, it also came with German was the language of erudition because in Riga, German schools were at the highest levels of achievement.
Yeah.
And, so Yiddish and Russian and Latvian and all of these things were just in a kind of a great potent mix.
Yeah. Huh. Wow.
Well, you have some Jewish heritage. Did you have any?
I have some Jewish heritage, yeah. My grandmother was Jewish. But they had a complicated story, and she would deny that she was Jewish. That's part of a protective mechanism, I think, that was quite common after the Holocaust.
Sure.
Because she lost so much of her family, and tried to deal with that sort of loss is unimaginable, really, unfathomable. So I don't really have Jewish culture at all.
You might have more than you think.
Well, if you're English, I would say that, and this is go back to an earlier part of the conversation, I think that Judaism and Jewish culture is hugely important for English. It's our moral system is founded on the Jews' moral system.
Well, this is, one of these relationships, which it's very important that Jews not think they can get by without Christianity. And Christianity needs to stop trying to rid itself of its Jewish foundation. I mean...
Do you think it is?
Yeah, sometimes.
How so?
I think when you look at the anti-Jewish sentiments that are cropping up now everywhere on social media, you see this sort of terrible thing, which is, imagine that you lost a nickel in a $10,000 couch, and you become obsessed with trying to get the nickel out of your couch. And you tear the couch to shreds, just for the privilege of getting rid of the nickel. I think that in some sense that's what we keep doing with culture, that sometimes there's a dream that we're going to purify ourselves, that the Christians, really got things right and the Jews are somehow an adulteration of Christianity. That will never work. And on the other hand, if Jews have any kind of ideas that they can possibly succeed without a Christian substrate in the world, they've got another thing coming. And this idea of learning what these relationships are, like the U.S. is not the U.K. and the U.K. is not the U.S., but it's really important that they reinforce each other. And I don't know what to do about that because the dream of purity is usually a dream that has to be resisted. It will result in madness. Because things that are somewhat doped with each other tend to be much stronger through hybrid vigor. But somebody will say, well, of course you would say that. You're hawking your evil ways. We have to be very concerned about what's about to happen, where Christians are not going to church. They're not singing their own songs. They're not living their own traditions, their own theology, their own philosophical traditions. And I think what we need is a much more vibrant spiritual, cultural life, even if people are atheistic. As an atheist who prays and as an atheist who goes to houses of worship, and not only my own. We were just in church with Douglas in St. Helena. I think it's very important to attend each other's houses of worship.
An atheist that prays, what do you mean, an atheist that prays? Because so the church I go to in London is famous that it attracts a lot of atheists. Whether they're or not they're praying, I couldn't possibly say. So I understand the idea of maintaining the ritual of going to houses of worship and sharing each other's places of worship. But the act of prayer itself, it's such a personal thing. I mean, if you are praying, aren't you, by definition, believing?
Winston, if you're honest with yourself, your faith is not uniform. It is tested at some points. It is stronger at others. And, I really think that we have this blockage whereby we have what I call a Chomskyan pre-grammar of religiosity.
What does that mean?
We have a facility for language, whether we know it or not. And something is going to attach to that, whether it's Arabic or Farsi or Spanish. In the same way, we have a basic facility for religiosity and prayer. And so something is going to bind to that. You know, if you recite the Pledge of Allegiance, that's somewhat close to a prayer. It's a national prayer, if you will. You know, but whether you say, I pledge allegiance to the flag, or you say, Our Father who art in heaven, all of these things are attaching to the same thing, and it's not going to go unbound.
Yeah.
You know, so I make this point, as you may have heard, about AC/DC, and You Shook Me All Night Long, you know, and what key are you in?
G.
She was a fast machine, she kept the motor clean. The woman that I... So the part that goes into this, yeah, you shook me
All night long.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's so close to Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Ehad. The Shema is this very holy prayer with 4 notes, really. Do, re, mi, and fa. And, you know, yeah, you shook me all night long. It has that power. And I think that what we don't realize is that there's no way of escaping prayer. It's going to, whether it's profane, you know, whether or not it's recognized as prayer, you're going to end up praying. And you're going to end up talking to something. You know, do you talk to the dead?
Yeah.
Yeah, so do I. It's kind of crazy that you know somebody so well that you can conjure their voice. You know, everybody has a Donald Trump impression at this point. And if Donald Trump had been taken by this bullet, you'd still have enough information about him to conjure him about what he would say and how he would act. And so I find it very strange that people don't want to talk to the dead, even though really talking to the dead is just talking to your client side model of somebody you've lost. And I think it's weird not to want to pray just because you don't think that there's anybody on the other end of the phone. You know, think about if you're with customer service, you start bargaining. Please, somebody pick up the phone. You know, I've been on hold for 20 minutes. Is there no one there to hear me? You know, that's a lot of what prayer is. It's just, it's hope that there is somebody on the other end, whether you believe that there's no one there at all or not.
So you're a praying man?
Every week. Without fail, almost. I mean, you know, we try to take Shabbat dinners fairly seriously. And my wife used to be very uncomfortable about the fact that we would invite people over. Because she'd say, well, you know, people aren't comfortable. And we got over it. And quite honestly, everybody wants it in their lives. People say, you do this every week. I've never seen anything like that. There are no traditions. Nobody's keeping these things up. But imagine that you have like a dinner every week with your favorite people in the world or strangers who have no place to go. And, you know, for 3 hours, you're just going to eat good food. You're going to talk about what's going on in the world. You're going to sing songs. It's so good for the soul. There's no reason. And this is something that, you know, I really wish Christians would take seriously. You don't have to have a Shabbat dinner, but nobody's telling you you can't. And if you want to really get involved in your history and where Christianity came from, I'd highly recommend it. You know, I grew up going to a school with an Episcopal church on campus, and we went once every 2 weeks to, you know, hear sermons and lift our voices in prayer, whether we were Jewish or Episcopal or Muslim or Hindu. It doesn't matter. You I just think people need to get over themselves a little bit more and open their hearts and try to use this as a commonality rather than as a dividing line.
I've seen, I don't know if this is happening society-wide, but there's been a definite, in the intellectual space, there's been a definite response against the new atheist movement. The prominent people being Ayaan Hirsi Ali, for example, her recent conversion to Christianity from being one of the most prominent new atheists. Jordan Peterson's been at the front of that, a lot of that stuff, and where he is exactly with his faith, he's always a bit ambiguous. Russell Brand, although rather theatrical, is definitely a prominent example of someone converting to Christianity publicly recently. There seems to be a re-engagement with the founding metaphysical and scriptural underpinnings of our civilization, which at the surface it seems very encouraging and positive to me. I would even include myself in it. I was not a Christian 5 years ago, and was an atheist and came to Christ and have it's completely changed everything for me, and it's interesting to see this across society. Is this something you're encouraged by? Have you noticed this? Do you think
Sure. The thing
do you think
about
it's real, or do you think it's just?
I'm in a funny place about it because, I was in a situation in which I was the only non-free speech absolutist, where everyone was claiming that they were free speech absolutists.
Yeah.
But then I didn't deviate from my path because I didn't have to. I saw the challenges that were going to come up, where the edge case takes somebody out of their free speech absolutism. And I think I feel the same way about my atheism. We've been doing this prayer thing for 20 plus years, close to 25 now. So my feeling is I don't have the same need to lurch from one side to the other. I think prayer is really good, and I think it's really important to consider your belief and realize that no atheist is perfect in their certainty that there is no good argument for a God, and no devout person is unwavering. Most important thing is self-acceptance. What does it mean to be a human being? Tell me that you're not built for religion and prayer. It's like saying to me you're not built for language. Or, this marvelous opposable thumb that we have has no function. So it's there, and it's going to get used. I would far prefer that it be used by something that's been around for centuries and that brings us together, and that we know the dangers of it so that we don't get divided by it. We don't try to purify ourselves and try to find the heretics and the apostates to be burned at the stake. But even the tough one for me is Islam, because I have a quote which is that I love everything about war except for death and destruction. I love everything about Islam except for its propensity for oppression and violence. But the beauty, of architecture, the call to prayer, the concern for the poor, the strength of families, the quality of the food, the tough part is getting rid of the madness. And we've had Jewish madness, we've had Christian madness, we've had Muslim madness, we've had Hindu madness. It's really important to recognize that we are all responsible for pruning ourselves of the madness so that we can be good neighbors to each other.
There's a tricky thing with Islam, which I don't know how I can tie in the Jewish scripture with this, but certainly if you compare Muhammad to Christ, Christ is infallible and untouchable. Like, he is the perfect human. Certainly the story that we know about him. Muhammad was a warmonger and spread that religion by the sword. And so this propensity to violence that you name, I think ultimately goes back to the founder of that religion. So I'm not sure it's that obvious to me how it can be. Now, there's some brilliant Muslims, and geopolitically, I've said this regularly on the show, what the Emiratis have done for peace in the Middle East, their willingness to trade and work with Israel gives me great hope for the future of the region, particularly if Israel can be successful in this war. But one of the problems we've had in Britain is this intensity and tension between British Muslims and British non-Muslims that seems to be this is one of the crucial questions for our country.
Pluralistic society can afford totalizing ideologies. If you had totalitarian Prius owners who felt that the only car was the Prius and everyone else was heretical, that wouldn't work. And we're down to very few totalizing ideologies. The problem is not any particular religion. The problem is totality. Right? When you get to totalizing, then no argument can come from outside. And, in part, not to make a point of it, but you mentioned two historical figures. What would be the comparable figure in Judaism? Moses. Moses was pretty imperfect. He doesn't want to talk directly to God at the beginning. Why me? Why am I going to go talk to Pharaoh? I have a stutter. He's sort of induced by God into too close of a relationship. He then screws up when he's tapping the rock with his staff, and he says, "I will bring you water." And the Lord says, "What do you mean you? I thought I was bringing the water. You were just tapping the rock with the staff."
He screws up again when he doesn't circumcise his children, and God almost ends it for him, that period.
So my claim is...
There's a big difference, though. Sorry. Make your claim, and then I'll
My
push
claim
back.
is that perfection is terrifying. And if we Jews have something to contribute to the potluck, it might be that if you think you understand the will of God, and if you think you understand exactly what you're supposed to do and what everyone else is supposed to do, you probably missed a meeting. And you need to have some epistemic humility. And, in the case of perfect figures, you should say, well, if those perfect figures are unique in your ideology, then no human is capable of divining exactly what he or she is supposed to do. I don't know how to soften it. There's a very strict interpretation of some of these religions in which, everything is divine and known, and I don't know how to unhook that. But I think the key issue is that totalizing is the problem. The reason communism is so dangerous is that it's a totalizing ideology.
Mm-hmm.
North Korea has a totalizing ideology. Now, we're not in danger because North Korean, whatever, Juche or whatever their theory is, hasn't spread. But we're now down to very few totalizing ideologies. And the problem isn't the religions, it's totality.
Mm-hmm. The problem that Islam has on that specific issue is that Christ is perfect and infallible, but his actual behavior was perfect and infallible. Moses, though a prophet, was human, made mistakes, and God punished him. Muhammad, though a prophet, whether he's fallible or not is in contention, and throughout the Quran it does say you have to take this literally, you have to take this word.
I think I've said what I mean to say. The problem is perfection. The problem is totalizing behavior and totalizing ideology. We err when we attempt to single out particular totalizing ideologies. The problem is totality. Anybody who's not subscribed to a totalizing ideology is reachable. Anybody who is subscribed to any totalizing, like vegans, if you had a totalizing vegan ideology, there would be no way of reaching that person. The problem isn't where totality alights. The problem is totality.
On that note, Dr. Weinstein, thank you so much for your time.
Winston, a great pleasure.
I feel very lucky to have the chance to speak to you for so long, and even better to have your grandfather's instrument and talk so many topics. That was fascinating. Is there anything that any loose ends you feel that you?
Many, and I look forward to dealing with them with you on a future conversation.
I would love that. Thank you, Dr. Weinstein.
Thank you, sir.